Small towns, quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and secrets buried deeper than their darkest woods. These are the places where shadows linger a little too long, where a knock at the door might not come from the living, and where the truth behind whispered legends is more horrifying than fiction. Tonight, we unveil 7 true stories of terror from the heart of small-town America. Are you brave enough to hear them all? I don't scare easy, but that night changed everything. I moved to Brookhaven 6 months ago. Fresh start, new town, quiet streets, a cute little rental with a yard big enough for my son Jake to run around. It was supposed to be perfect, but perfect doesn't exist. It started with the babysitters. I work nights sometimes, bartending at a little spot off Main Street, so I needed someone to watch Jake. The first sitter, a girl from the neighborhood, quit after one night. No explanation, just said she couldn't do it. The second one lasted 2 shifts, then a third. Same thing. I'd come home, pay them, and by morning I'd get a text saying they wouldn't be back. Jenna Carter was my last hope. College kid, seemed solid. She came in on a Friday, all smiles, and said she'd stay late. Around midnight, I got a text. "Can you come home early?" No explanation. I told her I was closing up and would be back soon. By the time I pulled into the driveway, she was sitting on the porch, pale as a ghost. She barely looked at me, just shoved the cash back in my hand. "I can't," she said. "I'm sorry, I can't." I grabbed her wrist, not hard, but enough. "What happened?" She hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the house. "You should check the baby monitor." My stomach dropped. I rushed inside, straight to the monitor sitting on my nightstand. It had a little screen, grainy, black and white, but good enough. I hit rewind. There was Jake, fast asleep. And then, the closet door behind him, it opened, not fast, slow, like someone was trying not to make a sound. My breath caught. I watched, frozen, as the door inched wider, and then movement. A figure, tall, lean, just standing there in the dark, watching him. I dropped the monitor, bolted for Jake's room, threw the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. He stirred, but didn't wake. I flipped the light on. Closet door? Wide open, empty. I tore through that house, checking every lock, every window. Nothing. No signs of a break-in, no footprints, no explanation. Jenna was already gone by the time I made it back outside. I don't blame her. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat in Jake's room, staring at that closet, waiting for something to move. But nothing did. I don't know what she saw before she texted me. I don't know how long someone had been coming into my house, watching my son. I only know one thing. We're leaving. I didn't expect to feel anything when I came back to that town. I told myself it was just a visit, a quick stop to see how time had moved on without me. But the second I crossed into Hollow Creek, my stomach tightened, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up to yet. I parked outside a diner I used to know. Same faded sign, same cracked asphalt. The air smelled like rain and something else, something metallic. It was probably just in my head, but as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it again. That prickling on the back of my neck, like eyes on me. The waitress barely glanced up. The coffee was burnt. The town looked the same, but something was off. It had been 20 years since I put Raymond Decker away. 20 years since I walked through these streets thinking I'd done my job. Closed the book on Hollow Creek's darkest chapter. But sitting in that booth, staring at the counter where Decker used to sit, I felt it creeping in, the doubt. I used to watch him from this very spot. Decker was a loner, a quiet type, kept to himself, which made him an easy target when a girl went missing. The evidence lined up too neatly, his prints on the car, his hair in the house. The town wanted justice, and I gave it to them. But now I wasn't so sure. Something shifted in the diner. A man stood near the door, tall, lean, hands in his pockets, but his eyes, dark, unreadable, locked on me. I knew that look. I'd seen it in interrogation rooms, in courtrooms, on the faces of men who thought they'd gotten away with something. My pulse kicked up, but I forced myself to sip the coffee. Bitter, lukewarm, familiar. He sat at the counter, 2 stools from where Decker used to sit. And he kept watching me. I turned slightly, trying to shake the feeling, but it clung to me like smoke. Then he smiled. just barely. And that's when it hit me. I knew that face, younger, maybe, less worn, but the shape of it, the sharpness in the eyes. I'd seen it before, in old case files, witness statements, sketches that never quite matched. The girl who disappeared, her neighbor had described a man. Said he was watching the house the night she went missing. The sketch had been brushed aside, too vague, too broad, and we had Decker. We had our guy, or so I thought. The man at the counter tilted his head, like he knew I'd figured it out, like he was waiting to see what I'd do with it. My hands felt numb, my mind raced. How had I missed this? Had he been here all along? Had he watched the whole thing unfold, knowing we had the wrong man? I didn't say a word, didn't react, just tossed a few bills on the table and stood. He didn't stop me, didn't move, just kept that slight smile like he knew something I didn't. Outside, the air was thick, heavy. I got in my car and gripped the wheel, staring at my reflection in the rear view. The face looking back at me wasn't that of a man who'd solved a case. It was the face of a man who'd just realized he might have spent the last 20 years believing a lie. I started the engine, but I didn't drive off. Not yet, because I knew. The second I left, I'd start seeing him everywhere, in the background of old photos, in shadows on the sidewalk, in the quiet spaces between memories I once trusted. And the worst part, he knew it too. I still don't know how I made it out of that town alive. It started with a wrong turn. I'd been driving for 8 hours straight, the glow of my dashboard clock telling me it was well past midnight. My rig rumbled beneath me, headlights cutting through the empty 2-lane highway. The map app lost signal somewhere back on Route 6. And before I knew it, I was rolling into a town I didn't recognize. A little place called Ashford. Population? No clue. There weren't any signs. I figured I'd find a gas station, grab a coffee, and ask someone how to get back to the main road. The only place open was a diner, one of those rundown joints with flickering neon lights, and a single pickup truck parked outside. The bell jingled when I stepped in, and heads turned. Not many, just a handful of locals nursing their coffee. Their eyes lingered on me a second too long. I took a seat at the counter, the old man behind it wiping a rag over the chipped surface. "Late for a trucker," he said, voice low. "Yeah, lost, actually. Thought I'd stop for coffee." The man nodded, and then poured me a cup without asking. "Where you headed?" "Back to I-70. That's when I heard it. A quiet murmur from the corner booth. 3 men hunched over, talking low. One of them, a big guy in a flannel jacket, barely moved his lips as he muttered, "Newcomer's test." The others nodded. I kept my eyes on my coffee, acted like I hadn't heard. But my gut clenched. The old man slid the sugar closer to me. "Ed will explain." "Ed?" A chair scraped. The big guy in the flannel got up, boots heavy on the floor as he crossed the room, stopped right next to me. "Sheriff Ed Garland." Sheriff, not a uniform in sight, just a tired, weathered face and sharp eyes that studied me too long. He pulled a toothpick from his pocket, rolling it between his teeth. "You got here late." I swallowed a sip of coffee, burned my tongue. Didn't mean to, just passing through. He nodded, slow. "The thing is, we don't get passers-by." The diner had gone silent. Even the radio behind the counter, some old country song, had cut out. I glanced at the door. The air felt thick, like I'd stepped into something I didn't understand. Sheriff Garland leaned in. "There's a rule in Ashford. Newcomers take the test." I let out a half laugh, pretending like this was some small-town joke. "What kind of test?" The men at the booth were watching now. So was the cook behind the grill. The old man at the counter wiped his hands on his apron. "3 tasks, Garland said. "1 before sunrise. You pass, you leave, you fail." He didn't finish. Didn't have to. I set my cup down. "And if I say no?" A long pause. Then the cook chuckled, low, almost pitying. Garland's toothpick shifted. "Nobody says no." I glanced around. The way they all stared, like they were waiting for me to accept or refuse. Either way, they already knew how this night would end. My chest tightened. My truck was parked just outside, keys in my pocket. But something told me I wouldn't make it out of that parking lot if I ran. I exhaled, gave a slow nod. "All right," Garland grunted. "Good." He tipped his head toward the door. "First task's out back." I stood, the chair legs scraped against the floor. The old man picked up my half-finished coffee. I followed Garland past the booths, past the cook who wouldn't meet my eyes. The night air hit my face as we stepped outside. It smelled like rain, like wet asphalt. A single yellow bulb buzzed above the doorway, casting weak light over the empty alley. Garland stopped by a metal drum. Inside, something smoldered, ash and charred wood. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, handed it to me. "Burn it," he said. I hesitated, unfolded the page. It was a photo. A woman, mid-30s, brown hair pulled back. She was smiling, not at the camera, at someone just outside the frame. I frowned. "Who is this?" Garland didn't answer. My pulse thudded. "Who is she?" His voice was steady. "Burn it." My fingers tightened around the paper. The fire crackled in the drum, waiting. Inside the diner, the others were still watching. The weight of their stares pressed against the back of my neck. I looked back at the woman in the photo, something about her eyes, like she knew something I didn't. I swallowed hard and let go. I still don't know why I opened that notebook. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was something else, something that pulled me toward it like a whisper I couldn't quite hear. But I did, and that was the moment everything changed. It was a slow afternoon at Millie's Diner, the kind where the air conditioning hums louder than the customers, and the coffee pot is half full but going cold. I was wiping down the counter when I spotted it. A plain black notebook tucked into the corner of booth 5. Leonard's booth, Leonard Fisk. Always the first customer through the door at 6 a.m., always ordered black coffee and wheat toast, always sat in the same spot by the window. He was polite, quiet, one of those people who fade into the background, the kind you don't think twice about. I figured he'd left it by accident. I should have just put it in the lost and found. But something about it made me hesitate. I glanced toward the door, empty, no one was watching. So I flipped it open. The first few pages were neat. Dates, grocery lists, mundane notes about the weather. Then the handwriting changed. The letters slanted, the ink darker, pressed into the pages like the words had been written with a shaken hand. I started reading. "I watch her every morning. She doesn't notice me, but I see everything." My stomach twisted. I scanned ahead. She laughs when she talks to the cook. She tucks her hair behind her ear when she's nervous. She always smells like vanilla. I slammed the notebook shut. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just anyone. This was about me. The door jingled and I nearly jumped out of my skin. But it wasn't Leonard, just a couple of teenagers looking for milkshakes. I forced a smile, took their order, all while my mind raced. Was this a joke? A coincidence? But as I flipped through the pages, it got worse. She leaves at 3:15. She walks 2 blocks before unlocking her car. Sometimes she checks the back seat, but she never looks under the car. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. I thought back. Had I ever seen someone near my car? A shadow? A lingering figure? I couldn't remember, but suddenly I wished I had. I wanted to stop reading, but I couldn't. The words pulled me in, page after page. Last night, I stood outside her window. She left the curtain open just enough. I almost knocked, maybe tomorrow. I clapped a hand over my mouth. My apartment was on the 2nd floor. There was no way someone could be standing outside my window, but my fire escape. Oh God, the fire escape. The bell jingled again. This time, it was him, Leonard. He shuffled in like always, head down, hands in his pockets. My pulse hammered. Did he know I had it? Could he tell? I forced myself to move, to grab the coffee pot. My fingers trembled as I poured. "Morning, Ava." His voice was the same as always, flat, distant. I forced a smile. "Morning, Leonard." He didn't look at me, just stirred his coffee, eyes on the window, like he was watching something, or someone. I needed to get rid of the notebook, put it back, forget I ever saw it. But I couldn't. I needed to know how it ended. I almost knocked. Maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow, that was today. My breath came fast, shallow. I felt exposed, like he could see right through me. I had to get out. I had to call someone, but who? The cops. What would I say? That I found a creepy notebook and now my regular customer made me nervous? I backed toward the kitchen, my mind spinning, and then I heard it. A soft chuckle. Barely there, I turned back. Leonard was smiling, just slightly, just enough. I ran right out the back door into the alley, my breath coming in gasps. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking too hard to type. I needed help. I needed a footstep behind me. I spun. Nothing. Just the wind, just the rustle of leaves. But I knew better. I left town that night. I didn't pack. I didn't say goodbye. I just got in my car and drove. I don't know if Leonard ever knocked on my window that night. I don't want to know, but sometimes when I stop for gas or when I check into a motel, I feel it, like someone is watching me. I still don't know how I made it out of that night alive. I wasn't looking for trouble, just answers. It started with an old family tree I found buried in my grandmother's attic. I had always been curious about where we came from, but my mom never talked much about her side of the family, said it was better left alone. But when I traced our history back to a small town in Tennessee, something didn't add up. Every woman in my bloodline, gone, disappeared. No death certificates, no graves, just vanished. My last known relative, Margaret Tate, was listed as missing in 19 before her mother, her grandmother. Every generation, one after another, erased, and no one seemed to care. I needed to see the town myself. So I took a few days off work, packed my car, and made the 6-hour drive to Hollow Creek. It was exactly what you'd expect, quiet, tucked between endless stretches of woods, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and strangers stuck out. I stopped at the county records office first, but the clerk, an older man with thin-rimmed glasses, barely looked up from his desk when I asked about Margaret. "Don't know the name," and he muttered, flipping a page in his ledger. "Best check the library." So I did, and that's when things got weird. The library was small, just a few rooms. A single librarian sat behind the desk, an older woman with sharp eyes that lingered too long. When I asked for anything on the Tate family, she didn't even pretend to search. Just pressed her lips together and said, "No records here." I almost left it at that. Almost, but then I noticed something. A box labeled obituaries and missing persons behind the counter, and Margaret's name was written in faded ink on the side. I pointed at it. "Can I see that?" The librarian's smile didn't reach her eyes. "That's not for the public." I left before she could ask more questions, but something about her expression made my stomach twist. I needed to find another way in. That night, I waited until the library closed, parked a block away, walked around back. The side window was old, the latch loose. It slid open with a little effort. I climbed in, heart hammering. The room smelled like dust and paper. I moved quickly, found the box, pulled it onto the desk. My hands trembled as I flipped through the yellowed files. Margaret Tate. Aged when last seen leaving her home. No evidence of foul play. Case closed. That didn't make sense. I kept digging, page after page of missing women. No follow-ups, no suspects. It was like the town had decided they never existed. Then I heard it. A soft creak. The sound of a door easing open. My breath caught. Someone was inside. I pressed myself against the desk, heart in my throat. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moved through the rows of shelves. I swallowed hard. The librarian, a security guard? Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. I needed to go, now. I tucked the file under my jacket and slipped toward the window. The steps were getting closer. I hoisted myself up, one leg over the sill, and then a hand grabbed my ankle. I kicked hard and heard a grunt. My other foot connected with something solid. I didn't wait to see who it was. I scrambled out, hit the ground running. My car was 2 blocks away. I could hear them behind me, heavy footsteps pounding the pavement. My keys were in my pocket, but my hands were shaking so bad I dropped them trying to unlock the door. I fumbled, yanked the door open, threw myself inside. Locked it. Started the engine just as a figure reached the driver's side window. A man, middle-aged, eyes dark and flat. He didn't yell, didn't try the handle, just stood there watching as I sped off. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. I checked into a motel an hour away, hands still shaking as I spread the files across the bed. That's when I saw it. A name that kept appearing in every missing person report. John Whitaker, listed as a concerned citizen in each case, interviewed but never charged. I searched for him online, nothing recent, but in an old town directory, I found an address. And then I realized It was the same street the librarian had given me when I asked where Margaret Tate had lived. I left Hollow Creek that night, drove until the sun came up. I still have the files. I still see that man's face in my nightmares. And I know one thing for sure. Someone in that town knows exactly what happened to Margaret, and they don't want me asking questions. I still don't know what we did wrong, but I know they were watching. Every second, every move, waiting. Henry and I retired last year, sold the house, packed up decades of memories, and moved out here. This quiet little town, nestled between the hills and the lake. It was supposed to be peaceful. We'd spend our mornings on the porch with coffee, afternoons taking slow walks down Main Street, nights curled up with old movies and a fire. A simple, good life, that's all we wanted. That's all we planned for. The first time I noticed something was off, I brushed it away. We'd been here just a couple of weeks, still settling in. I was pulling weeds from the front garden when I looked up and saw Richard Bellows, standing in his yard just across the street, arms crossed, staring. I forced a smile, raised a hand slightly in a friendly wave, but he didn't react, he didn't move, just kept watching. There was something unsettling about it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. His expression was blank, unreadable. I turned away, brushing the dirt off my hands, telling myself I was overreacting. That night, as we sat down for dinner, I thought about mentioning it to Henry, but he was already talking about some small repairs we needed to do, the weather, and I let it go. It was just a neighbor, a harmless, nosy neighbor, but the feeling didn't go away. And then it started happening more often. Whenever I stepped outside, he was there, standing, watching, never speaking, never acknowledging me. And he wasn't the only one. The woman at the grocery store knew who I was before I even introduced myself. The gas station attendant stared at me for just a second too long. And then there was the woman walking her dog past our house. She never actually walked past. She stopped just at the edge of our property, staring at the house, then turned around. It wasn't just in my head. The town was small, but it felt smaller than it should, like everyone was connected by something I didn't understand. They all seemed to know us, though we had never met. And then the note started. The first one appeared on our doorstep, a folded piece of paper without an envelope. No name, no return address, just a single sentence. You broke the rule. One more time and there will be consequences. I stood there staring at it in confusion, my pulse quickening. What rule? We hadn't done anything. We were barely leaving the house. Henry told me to ignore it, that it was probably just some bored kids messing with us, but something about it felt too deliberate, too personal. And then the noises started, soft, rhythmic tapping against the windows, always late at night. At first, I thought it was a tree branch, the wind, maybe even an animal, but it moved. First the kitchen window, then the living room, then the bedroom, always in that order. Always just slow enough to make my skin crawl. I started keeping track. When it happened, how long it lasted, how close it seemed. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but the dread sat in my stomach like a stone. Henry tried to calm me down, told me I was letting my imagination run wild. But I wasn't imagining the second note. It was taped to our mailbox, waiting for me in the morning. Final warning. We started packing that afternoon. It didn't matter that we had a lease. It didn't matter that we had spent weeks making the place feel like home. It wasn't home. It never had been. We threw what we could into suitcases, loaded up the car, and pulled out of the driveway before the sunset. I looked back only once, and what I saw will haunt me for the rest of my life. Richard Bellows was standing in his yard, but he wasn't alone. The woman from the grocery store, the man from the gas station, the woman with the dog. Half the town, standing on their porches or on the sidewalk, watching us leave. Their faces were calm, unreadable, like they had been expecting this, like they had been waiting for it. No one waved, no one spoke, just rows and rows of silent eyes watching us disappear down the road. We never looked back again. We don't talk about it. We don't tell anyone what happened. I don't know what would have happened if we had stayed. I don't want to know, but sometimes, even now, in a different town, in a different state, I still feel it. That feeling of being watched, of being monitored. I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I'll hear that slow, deliberate tapping against the window again. And some nights I swear I do. I still don't know how I made it out of that town. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, just me, my playlists, and the open road. I needed a break. College had been suffocating, and a few days away felt like the perfect reset. No deadlines, no group projects, just me. I don't even know why I did it, really. Maybe it was the nostalgia, the stories my grandma used to tell. She grew up in a little town called Willow Creek, somewhere off the main highway, barely a dot on the map. I was already halfway there when I thought, why not? It would be nice to see the place, grab a few photos, maybe find the house she grew up in. The turnoff was easy to miss. No big signs, just a rusted old post that said Willow Creek in faded letters. The road leading in was narrow, the kind that makes you wonder if it actually goes anywhere. Trees closed in on both sides. It was quiet, too quiet, the way deep woods get when you're the only thing disturbing them. Then the town appeared, like it had been waiting for me. Willow Creek was small, frozen in time. The buildings had that old-fashioned look like a movie set from the 50s. A diner, a gas station, a few shops. People milled about, slow, deliberate, no one on their phones, no cars buzzing past, just a town caught in a loop. I pulled up to the diner first, figuring I'd grab a coffee and ask around. As soon as I walked in, everything stopped. Conversations died, heads turned, and every single face was staring at me, not in the usual small-town way where strangers are curious. No, this was different. Their eyes weren't questioning, they were knowing, like they recognized me. I felt it immediately, that deep, gut-level wrongness. An older woman behind the counter smiled first, but it wasn't the friendly kind. More like approval, like she had been expecting me. "Clara Lawson," she said. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone my name. Yeah, I managed, forcing a laugh. "How did you, honey," she said, wiping her hands on a rag. "We all know the Lawsons. We remember your grandmother well." A murmur rippled through the diner, people nodding, exchanging glances. I took a step back. "That's impossible," I said. "She left this town when she was a kid. She never came back." The woman's smile didn't falter. "Oh, but she did." The air felt thick, stifling. I turned and left, moving fast. Back to my car, back to the road. I needed to get out of there, except the gas station attendant greeted me by name. An old man tipping his hat on the sidewalk said, "Just like your grandma, you got her eyes." A kid, no older than 10, whispered, "She's back," before being shushed by his mother. I wanted to scream, how did they know me? Why were they acting like I belonged here? I practically ran to my car, yanking the door open. My hands were shaking so badly I fumbled the keys. As I bent to grab them, a shadow fell over me. "Leaving so soon?" I spun. An older woman stood there, neat gray hair, sharp eyes. Something about her made my skin crawl. "I don't know what's going on," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "But I don't belong here." She tilted her head. "Of course you do." I backed up. "No, I don't. I've never been here in my life." The woman sighed like I was being difficult. "You should come inside," she said. "Talk for a while." "No, thanks." I turned back to my car, but her hand shot out, gripping my wrist, stronger than she looked. Her fingers felt like ice. "Agnes Holloway," she said, like it meant something to me. "Your grandmother's friend. We need to talk. Let me go." For a second, I thought she wouldn't. Then she did. I wasted no time. Got in, locked the doors, started the engine. Agnes just watched me. No anger, no surprise, just waiting. I hit the gas, drove faster than I should have, tearing down that narrow road. My heart was pounding, breath ragged. I didn't stop until I hit the highway, not even to check my phone. When I finally pulled over an hour later, I looked at Willow Creek. Nothing. No records, no map listings. Like it had never existed. I called my grandma that night, asked her point blank if she had ever gone back. She was silent for a long time. Then she said in a voice I barely recognized, "Claire, promise me you won't go there again." I haven't, but sometimes I still dream about it.